All right, so where does Luke chapter 19 is where this parable come from, the parable of the talents, and better known, you said, in the book of Matthew.
Yes.
But we're looking at it through the lens of the way Luke writes it, which is interesting, right? Because Jesus would have probably shared these parables many different times with slightly different variations as you retell the same kind of teaching. And so Luke records it in this way in chapter 19. It's kind of interesting. So, Derek, help us dive into the kind of background understanding and the context of what the parable of the talents is all about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we're now in part of Scripture where we're kind of nearing the end of Jesus's ministry here on earth, right?
Yeah.
And we have heard him talk many times about the kingdom of God and what the kingdom of God is like, and so on and so forth. And we just have seen him, was Zacchaeus, I think was that, right? Before in Jericho, and we're about to see Jesus move in to this kind of triumphal entry. How do you say that? down into Jerusalem, which is a really important piece of this coming king. Right? And so Jesus starts to set up this parable talking about this was noble businessman, this nobleman, right, who is almost hated by his people.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. But Brandon, one of the things that you had mentioned when we were talking about this was that Jesus telling this story actually has a very clear historical impact as well.
Yeah, Jesus borrows from something that these people would have known about that had happened, I guess at this juncture, about 30 years before. When Herod the Great died, who was the king when Jesus was born, when he died, his kingdom was going to be split between his three sons, Philip, Herod Archelaus, and Herod Antipas. And in order to have your kingdom affirmed in that day, you had to go to Rome. You had to go, to Caesar, to his court, and appeal for your kingship to be recognized. So the three sons go. But Herod Archelaus, he is so hated by the people in the region that they send a delegation after him to say, we don't want him to be our king. We can't stand this guy. And as a result of that, Caesar at the time declines to make him a full-blown king. He still gets the region or whatever, but his title, I think, is like an ethnarch instead of a king or something like that. So Jesus is appealing to this kind of historical story. Like, a guy went to have his kingship affirmed, and people went after him to say, no, we don't want this guy.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a great setup on the story. So take us in, Brandon, a little bit. What's going on in this parable? Talk about the talents. What does it mean? And kind of take us through it.
Okay, so the story sets up where the nobleman is going to have his kingship affirmed. He's leaving, and he knows that a delegation is going to go after him and appeal his kingship and not want him to have that responsibility. But before he goes, he brings 10 of his servants together, and he gives them each a talent or a mina, or it's a pound of silver. Basically, the equivalent, what we would look at today, would be about $20,000 to $25,000, something around 3 to 4 months' wages, right? So not an insignificant amount of money. He gives 10 servants each this amount of money and tells them to do business with it while he's away. And what's significant about that is not just the entrusting money as a steward, right? There's an element of stewardship in this, but it's also an element of allegiance, because if he's giving this money away, then that means it's money that bears his stamp. It's money that bears his image as a king. And so basically what he's saying is, hey, this money is not really going to be valid until I'm king. But I want you to spend it, and I want you to use it under my authority and under my kingship. So there's not only a test of stewardship, there's a test of authority and trust. Do you trust that that my kingdom is going to come? So he goes, he's affirmed as king. The delegation isn't heard out. He comes back and he calls the 10 servants to him. And then it tells us the story of what 3 of those servants did with the money they were given. One of them says that he invested the money and he made 10 times the original amount. And the master says, well, that's great. You're going to get 10 cities in this new kingdom. The next servant comes and says, well, I made 5 times the original amount. And he says, well, that's great. You're going to be governor over 5 cities now in the new kingdom. And this third servant comes back with only the original amount of money. Again, we're talking $20,000, $25,000, not insignificant. But he says, well, master, I didn't do anything with it. I'm just bringing it back to you because I knew you were a difficult man. I knew you didn't want to lose your money. So I'm just going to give it back to you. And the master is furious at this, that, you could have put it in the bank, you could have invested, you could have done anything just to get a little bit of return. And again, I think the master's anger isn't so much about the investment so much as it is about the loyalty and the allegiance. Like, you didn't want to, align yourself with the kingdom. And so he says, you're a wicked servant. Your own words condemn me. If you knew that I was a hard man, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? And, this servant is punished for, not aligning himself with the one who would be king. And then Jesus does something that's fascinating, really, is he told us initially about 10 servants, but he stops there. And he just tells us about these 3 and leaves the other batch of servants kind of off to the wayside to kind of, I think, make us start to apply this and think, well, of those 7 of the servants that are left, like, what kind of servant am I? Yeah. Like, if I'm called to give an account when the kingdom comes, what am I going to present?
Yeah, it's super challenging when you look at what it could mean and who we are. And I like the fact that there's the empty 7 that are left. Like, which one are you? Where do you end up with it? So as we apply it, what's that look like?
Yeah, I think it asks 2 really important questions. Number 1, like, do I believe that Jesus is coming back as king? Like, do I believe in this kingdom that he's talking about? And then number 2, like, what am I going to do with the things that he has entrusted me with? Because we've been given so many, not only possessions, but like gifts and abilities. And the Lord doesn't want us to hoard those for ourselves. Like, we live in this culture that is a hoarding culture. It's like, let me see what I can accumulate and hold on to. But God doesn't want us to do that with our gifts and abilities. Like, he's given us those like for his kingdom and for his purposes and not our personal gain. And so, yeah, I think about like, what kind of servant am I going to be? Am I going to freely give my gifts and the things that God has given me for the benefit of his kingdom? And what am I going to do, like, if I truly believe that he is king, right? Like, if I'm living for a kingdom of Sarah, then of course I'm going to hoard all those things. But if I'm living for a kingdom that is outside of myself, then yes, I'm going to use my gifts and abilities to serve that kingdom, because we're all going to stand before him and give an account. Like, are we going to say, oh, I used my gifts and abilities for your kingdom, or I hoarded them all for myself? And I think that's so challenging. Like, we want to use these gifts to expand his kingdom and not just like hoard them, because he's given us those in his goodness and his grace, like for his glory.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because, I was trying to read these fresh every time and write down what I was thinking of. And as I read through this one, I hate this phrase, but it works. But I think a lot of people in the church want to just keep the talent, just keep the coin. And hang on to it. And they don't realize that, and the phrase I've heard before is this idea of not being like a constipated Christian, where there's so many people, like, they receive what it is and they just kind of want to hold on to like more knowledge and more factual information, like just even, Brandon sharing that story about the cultural context. That's only helpful in as much as we're willing to take that and apply it. If we just have the knowledge, that really isn't helpful for us. At the end of the day, like, our goal isn't to hold what's been given to us, but to use what's been given to us. And the other thing that's interesting is he rewards any of those that have return on their investment. Yeah. He rewards them with it. And so, Derek, as you read through this, how are you personally moved by this parable in your life?
Yeah, I think it's taking a look at my life and seeing like what are the ways that God has specifically equipped myself or my family to help other people, and because like if we're going to be about his kingdom, well, that's a part of that. And I think in one of the ways that Brandon was talking about this is like, hey, like, where is your, like, this really shows where your allegiance is, not only in this parable, but in real life with Jesus. And I love that word, because whether it comes to something like tithing, of like, hey, well, it's like, hey, you know what? Like, anything that is brought into our family, we want to see that it's given to us from God, and we want to give that, but also at the same time, we also want to give that away to someone who's in need. And I think it's just another one of those that, I think in a lot of tangible and intangible ways, our heart gets checked on what's important to us.
It's interesting because they didn't get this. They really misunderstood this, Brandon, because, I think you even just said before we started recording on this, you said even the best teachers sometimes are misunderstood.
Yes.
Certainly happened to Jesus. Take us into that context.
So verse 11 says, the crowd was listening to everything Jesus said. And because he was nearing Jerusalem, he's going to the place where the king, David's throne was in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He's nearing Jerusalem. He told them a story to correct the impression that the kingdom of God would begin right away. So he's telling them this story to say, hey, like, I am a king, but the kingdom isn't fully here yet. It's not here the way you think it's going to be. But then immediately after that is the story of the triumphant entry, where they pull up palm branches, which are a sign of like the Maccabees and the kingdom of Israel. And they're bringing Hosanna to the king. And after he's told them the story to correct it, like, they just don't get it. Like, oh no, it's here. It's happening. It's happening now. And I think, a phrase that came to mind as I read that story and thought about that misunderstanding is that it's really easy, isn't it, for the gospel to change our opinions. It's really easy for the gospel for us to look at the things happening around us today and think, oh, well, the gospel informs that. This changes the way I think about what's happening right now. But the gospel needs to go deeper than that and not just change our opinions, but change our outlook. Like, what is going to happen? What kingdom is coming? Is there a day of accountability on the horizon? Because if a king is coming back and he's going to hold us to account, that probably should change what we do today, right? That should probably change the idea that, hey, I know one day I'm going to stand before Jesus and have to say, like, this is what I did with what I was given. It's not just a matter of this is what's going on around me right now. It's a matter of this is what is going to happen, and I need to be ready for it.
Yeah, and he's given us something to start with. And it's funny, the double entendre with the name talent, that's often used there. But he's given us all something. And with whatever that is, our goal is that there's a reward and that there's a return on that, because our life isn't for ourselves. It's ultimately for the community around us to be given so that they can walk and know the grace of God.
Thank you for joining us today as part of our Parables Bible study. We really hope that talking through Jesus' key teachings from the Bible really benefited you. More than anything else, we would love to be able to help you take some next steps and be engaged with all that's happening with Southeast Christian Church and our online ministry. You can always text the words SC Online to 733-733 for all the ways to take that next step. Send us an email or definitely visit our website. But we're glad that you're a part of this. Join in and be a part of what's happening.